The year was 1981, and the world was just beginning to take notice of Electric Fire, a young rock band that had exploded onto the music scene with a raw, electric energy that set them apart from the polished acts of the time. The five-member group, barely out of their teens, had already topped charts with their debut album Neon Skies, a blend of gritty guitar riffs, pounding drums, and haunting lyrics that spoke to a restless generation. Their lead singer, Jackson Rivers, had the kind of magnetic charisma that made headlines wherever he went, rebellious, soulful, and unpredictable. Fans lined up for hours to catch a glimpse of them, and music magazines hailed them as the future of rock. The band had just wrapped up a sold-out show in Los Angeles and was scheduled to headline a major festival in Tokyo, a career-defining moment that could cement their place in music history. To celebrate their meteoric rise, their manager had chartered a sleek, white private jet to fly them across the Pacific in style. It was a luxury most artists only dreamed of: plush leather seats, state-of-the-art equipment, and enough room for their gear, crew, and close friends. Excitement buzzed through the cabin as they boarded, laughing, joking, and already working on new songs with their guitars in hand. The atmosphere was electric, full of youth, ambition, and the unshakable belief that they were destined for something bigger than fame. No one knew it would be the last time they were seen alive. As the jet took off into the golden California sky, the sun glinting off its wings, it carried with it more than just a band. It carried a dream, a movement, and the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the world for decades. Somewhere over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, hours into the flight, air traffic controllers lost all contact with Electric Fire's private jet. It had been a routine check-in, nothing out of the ordinary, clear skies, steady altitude, and no distress signal. Then, silence. Radar screens showed the plane's marker blinking steadily one moment and vanishing the next, as if the aircraft had simply evaporated into the atmosphere. Frantic attempts to re-establish communication yielded nothing. Within minutes, an emergency response was launched, and search and rescue teams were dispatched across the projected flight path, covering thousands of square miles of ocean. Ships and aircraft from the US and Japanese Coast Guards combed the area, while satellites were tasked to scan for any unusual debris or heat signatures. The ocean, however, offered no answers: no floating wreckage, no oil slicks, not even a single seat cushion. Back on land, news of the disappearance broke like a tidal wave. Fans flooded radio stations and newspapers with calls, disbelief, and desperate pleas for updates. The band's families were devastated, gathering in Los Angeles, hoping for any word, clinging to the possibility of a miraculous rescue. Candlelight vigils were held outside stadiums where the band had once performed, their music playing softly in the background like a ghostly echo. The media covered the story relentlessly, front pages filled with the band's last known photos, grainy images of their jet, and tearful interviews with loved ones. Still, no clues emerged. The jet had vanished completely, as if swallowed whole by the sea. After 2 weeks of intense search efforts, the official statement came: the operation was suspended, pending further evidence. The world was left stunned, grieving, and bewildered. A band that had once seemed unstoppable was now nothing more than a legend, its fate sealed beneath the waves, or so it seemed. In the years that followed the disappearance of Electric Fire, grief slowly gave way to speculation, and speculation soon spiraled into a storm of conspiracy theories. The complete lack of wreckage, radio signals, or even a single piece of luggage ignited imaginations around the world. Some believed the jet had flown into a mysterious atmospheric phenomenon, a kind of Bermuda Triangle in the Pacific. Others insisted the band had staged the whole thing, vanishing at the peak of their fame to escape the pressures of celebrity and start new lives in secret. Rumors surfaced of sightings: a man resembling Jackson Rivers playing guitar in a remote village in South America, or a woman who looked like bassist Lexi Stone spotted on a Greek island. None of the claims were verified, but tabloids ran them endlessly, feeding the public's hunger for answers and the thrill of mystery. As time passed, the myth of Electric Fire grew even larger than the band itself. Their records, once just hit albums, became sacred relics of a lost era. Bootleg copies of unreleased tracks and demo tapes were passed around like secret treasures. A generation of fans who had never even seen the band live began to treat them as icons, not just of music but of a cultural enigma. Books were written, documentaries aired, podcasts dissected every detail of their final days, often suggesting dark government experiments, alien abductions, or secret military projects. One theory even proposed that the jet was shot down by mistake during a classified operation, and the cover-up ran so deep that no trace was ever allowed to surface. But through all the noise, the families were left in limbo, caught between mourning and uncertainty. They attended the anniversaries, gave interviews, and begged the public to separate fact from fantasy. Yet as the world moved on to newer bands and fresher scandals, the mystery of Electric Fire remained frozen in time, unresolved, untouched, and eerily quiet. It was no longer just a tragedy. It had become a modern myth. 19 years passed, and the mystery of Electric Fire's disappearance refused to fade. Despite changing music trends, new generations of fans continued to discover their music, drawn not only to the raw emotion in their songs but also to the dark legend that surrounded them. Each anniversary of the flight's disappearance was marked with tribute concerts, social media memorials, and renewed calls for the case to be reopened. Still, no new evidence emerged. Over time, even the most passionate investigators began to lose hope. The ocean had kept its secret well. For the families of the band members, the wound never healed, it simply scarred over, a dull ache that surfaced every time someone mentioned Electric Fire's final flight. Yet the absence of closure created a strange kind of immortality. Without confirmed deaths or tangible wreckage, the band existed in a liminal space, neither fully gone nor truly alive in the minds of the public. What made the case so enduring wasn't just the loss of 5 young musicians at the peak of their potential, but the total erasure of the event from the physical world. No floating luggage, no distress call, no black box, just silence. And that silence became louder with each passing year. Musicians paid tribute to the band in their lyrics, filmmakers crafted fictionalized versions of their last moments, and forums buzzed with amateur sleuths who shared theories and GPS coordinates they believed held answers. Some speculated that the jet had been taken far off course, others claimed to have found clues in the band's lyrics pointing to a planned disappearance. Occasionally, interest would spike again, a new supposed leak, or an audio clip claiming to be the final cockpit recording, but none were ever confirmed. By the late 90s, Electric Fire had become more than a band. They were a cultural myth, a haunting symbol of lost youth, unfinished stories, and the terrifying idea that in an age of modern technology, something could still simply vanish. Their story was a ghost lingering on the edges of pop culture. A question no one could answer, a chord never resolved. And so, the world waited, not expecting answers, but never fully able to let go. In the summer of 2000, a U.S. Navy deep-sea training mission was deployed off the coast of Guam, conducting a routine sonar mapping exercise of the ocean floor. The crew aboard the USS Sentinel was running diagnostics with advanced submersible drones, scanning trenches rarely explored due to their depth and remoteness. The mission was standard, meant to test new equipment, until one of the sonar technicians noticed an unusual formation nearly 4,000 feet below the surface, an anomaly that didn't match any natural structure. Curious, the team deployed a remotely operated vehicle ROV equipped with high-resolution cameras and lights to investigate. As the drone descended into the dark, crushing depths, images began to flicker onto the monitors aboard the ship. At first, it was just a blur, shadows shifting in the deep, but then a shape emerged from the murky water, the unmistakable curve of a jet fuselage, eerily intact. The crew went silent as the camera panned over the wreckage. There was no mistaking it. The tail bore faded but still visible lettering, EF-81, the same registration number assigned to Electric Fire's ill-fated private jet. The plane was resting awkwardly on the ocean floor, its wings partially buried in the sediment, but the body was preserved far better than anyone expected after nearly 2 decades underwater. The deep pressure and cold had acted like a vault, slowing corrosion and protecting much of the structure. As the ROV moved closer, it captured haunting images, seats still bolted in place, scattered personal items, and, most chillingly, several musical instruments, untouched and eerily pristine, strapped where they had likely been secured for flight. The moment the images were transmitted back to the surface, word spread quickly through the ranks and up the chain of command. What began as a training exercise had turned into one of the most significant aviation discoveries in recent history. The Navy immediately sealed off the coordinates and notified civilian authorities. Experts from aviation, forensic science, and even music historians were called in to help identify and recover what they could. For nearly 20 years, the world had asked what happened to electric fire. Now, finally, the ocean had begun to answer, though what it revealed would only deepen the mystery. As the wreckage of the jet was carefully lifted from the ocean floor and transported to a secured naval facility, a wave of both anticipation and dread swept across the world. News of the discovery broke quickly, and once confirmed skeptics now found themselves glued to screens, watching as underwater footage aired across every major network. Experts worked tirelessly to preserve what they could from the cold, high-pressure depths. The aircraft's frame had remained surprisingly intact, and the cabin interior, though waterlogged and coated in layers of silt, offered a snapshot of a moment frozen in time. The most startling discovery was the condition of the band's personal belongings, which remained eerily undisturbed. Guitars were still strapped into their storage mounts. A keyboard case, warped by pressure but still sealed, held the instrument exactly as it was packed in 1981. Even a pair of headphones, resting across a seat armrest, looked as if they had just been used. Forensics teams treated the wreck like a crime scene. Every item was logged and photographed with painstaking detail. Among the recovered objects was a black duffel bag that belonged to Jackson Rivers, containing a lyric notebook with faded ink and pages warped by moisture, yet still legible. In it were lines to an unreleased song, titled, Skyfalling, with cryptic phrases about flying into silence and leaving the world behind. More strangely, the passenger cabin bore no signs of chaos or emergency. The seats were upright, seatbelts fastened, equipment stowed as per regulations. There were no visible signs of fire, explosion, or rapid decompression. It was as though the jet had gently descended into the ocean and settled there, untouched by panic or struggle. And then came the discovery that chilled even the most hardened investigators: a vintage camera, found lodged between two seats near the rear of the cabin. The film inside was miraculously preserved, thanks to the tightly sealed casing. Specialists developed the images in controlled conditions, uncertain of what they might find. What emerged were candid photos from inside the cabin, band members laughing, tuning instruments, sharing drinks, and, in the last few frames, playing together in what appeared to be an impromptu acoustic session. The timestamp on the final photo was just under an hour before the flight disappeared from radar. The joy in their faces, the total absence of fear or confusion, only deepened the mystery. Whatever had happened afterward, it left no trace on their expressions. The world watched in awe and sorrow as these images were released to the public. Fans wept. Journalists scrambled for meaning. The photos, so full of life and music, seemed to defy the truth of what followed. The jet had been found, the silence had been broken, but the answers, real answers, still hovered just out of reach. The recovered camera, a battered 35mm model popular in the late 70s, became the centerpiece of the investigation. When the film was carefully developed in a Navy lab under strict environmental conditions, every technician in the room held their breath. There were 24 photos in total, each one more haunting than the last. They began innocently enough: snapshots of the crew boarding the plane, ground staff waving goodbye, band members posing on the tarmac with goofy grins and sunglasses. Inside the plane, the mood was lighthearted. Someone had captured candid shots of Jackson Rivers strumming an unplugged electric guitar across two seats, Lexi Stone and drummer Tyler Blaze arm wrestling on the floor between the aisles. The final sequence of images told a very different story, not of fear or panic, but of surreal tranquility. The last 5 photos appeared to have been taken during what looked like a spontaneous jam session inside the cabin. All 5 band members were seated together, loosely gathered near the rear lounge area, with acoustic instruments in hand. The lighting was dim, warm, almost golden. No signs of distress could be seen on their faces, only deep concentration and a kind of calm joy, as if they were lost in the music, unaware of anything wrong. In the final photo, Jackson was looking directly into the lens, mid-verse, mouth slightly open as if singing, his eyes distant but peaceful. Behind him, through a small window, the sky was beginning to darken. That image, still, powerful, and unexplainably serene, would become one of the most iconic photographs in music history. What unsettled investigators the most wasn't what was in the photos, but what was not. There was no sign of emergency. No oxygen masks hanging from the ceiling. No abrupt movements, no broken items, no indication that the band had any idea something was going wrong. The sequence was so normal, so full of life, that it seemed impossible to reconcile with the fact that shortly after those moments were captured, the jet vanished entirely. How could a crash, or whatever had happened, leave no evidence of struggle, no time for reaction, no instinctive sign of fear? Aviation experts were baffled. Pilots insisted that any mechanical failure or sudden descent would have triggered alarms, at the very least caused panic, which should have been reflected somehow. But the cabin, the photos, and the band themselves all suggested otherwise. When the pictures were released to the public, they sparked an emotional response unlike anything in recent memory. Fans printed them on T-shirts, posters, album re-releases. One image even hung in a music hall of fame beneath a plaque that read, "The Last Song." But for those investigating the case, the images only deepened the strangeness. If the passengers hadn't known they were in danger, then who, if anyone, did? And why had the pilot, the only person missing from every photo and from the recovered wreckage, left no trace at all? The camera had given the world a final glimpse into the lost moments of electric fire, but it also raised a new and unsettling possibility, that someone, or something, had removed all evidence of what truly happened next. In the weeks that followed the wreckage's recovery, forensic teams turned their focus to the cockpit, hoping to uncover the final moments of the doomed flight through flight logs, voice recordings, or any trace of the crew. What they found, however, only thickened the fog surrounding Electric Fire's disappearance. The cockpit door was sealed shut when divers first approached the wreck, a detail that seemed minor until investigators realized it had been locked from the inside. This wasn't typical. Cockpit doors of that era weren't designed with complex locking mechanisms. The inside latch was meant for privacy during flight, not for permanent sealing. Yet somehow, it had been engaged, securely. When the door was finally forced open in a controlled environment at the naval base, what lay beyond stunned the team. The cockpit was empty. No pilot, no co-pilot, not even remains. The seats were undisturbed, the controls seemingly frozen mid-flight, with no sign of impact trauma, panic, or emergency procedures having been initiated. This inexplicable absence sent shockwaves through both military and civilian circles. Every theory that had once seemed implausible was suddenly back on the table. Some suggested the pilot had somehow escaped, parachuted out or been extracted in midair. Others whispered of classified experiments, time anomalies, even deliberate tampering with the wreck after the crash. But there was no evidence of an ejection, and no breach in the fuselage that would suggest any such escape. Aviation analysts pored over the recovered flight instruments, yet they revealed nothing unusual. Fuel levels were standard, altitude normal, and there were no signs of navigational errors or distress calls. It was as if, at some point during the flight, the pilot simply ceased to exist. The band's families, now older and visibly worn from decades of grief and half-answers, were granted private access to the wreckage before it was stored for further study. Jackson Rivers' sister, Eliza, stood inside the cabin where her brother had spent his final hours, tears tracing silent lines down her cheeks as she rested her hand on the seat where his guitar had been strapped. "It's like they just slipped away," she said to no one in particular. Her voice was soft, almost reverent, echoing the thoughts of everyone involved. The plane had returned, the band's final moments captured forever in a strip of film, but the one person who should have been in control, who held the responsibility for their lives, was gone without a trace. The official report was cautious, labeling the cause of the crash as undetermined, citing environmental degradation and the absence of conclusive data. But the public wasn't satisfied. The mystery took on new life, now less about the band and more about what, or who, was behind the disappearance. Theories evolved. Some claimed the pilot had been a government agent with secret knowledge. Others said the band had witnessed something they shouldn't have and were silenced. A few, the most devoted, believed Electric Fire had never actually died, that they had entered another plane of existence, their disappearance part of a metaphysical event we couldn't yet understand. In the end, the truth remained as submerged as the plane had been for nearly 2 decades. The recovery provided closure, yes, but only in the shallowest sense. The instruments, the camera, the images of joy and music moments before vanishing, all were pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. The band was home, their legacy now eternal, but the pilot's absence stood as a final, unyielding question. A locked door, an empty seat, and a silence that spoke louder than anything the black box could have said.